Um, welcome very much. That's a good start. Welcome everybody for coming along. Thanks for coming along. We're just going to wait a minute or so to make sure that the stragglers actually join in, because we don't want people to miss out what we've got to talk about today. It's a really fascinating and stimulating conversation about an incredible bird. So we will just wait another minute or so, I think, until we can see those numbers getting up. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us tonight. It's great to, in everyone with such busy lives, to actually take the time out to smell the mistletoe, so to speak, as you will find out soon what I'm talking about. So what have we got? We've got going up all the time, 177 people. This is almost like watching the lotto numbers coming out. That's 180, 183. I think maybe we'll get started in, we're 191. Once we hit 200, that's my final offer. We'll get started then. So here we are. Okay. So without further ado, I've declared this webinar open. Hello, everyone. My name is Sean Dooley. I am the Senior Public Relations Advisor at BirdLife Australia, and I am a long-time Regent Honeyeater fan. I'm also a fan of our two guests tonight. I had the fortune to see them speak about Regent Honeyeaters last weekend, about their work, and I'm really looking forward to going another round to find out all the conservation work that's happening with Regent Honeyeaters. So once again, thank you everybody who has joined us on this Thursday night. I know you all have busy lives, and it's just fantastic to see so many people really keen to hear about one of our favourite birds. I am coming to you from Melbourne on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. And I pay acknowledgement that that's the land that I'm coming on, and also pay my respects to the elders who managed to, over thousands of years, steward the landscape in such a way that when Europeans first got here, Regent Honeyeaters were an abundant species. The first time that I ever saw a Regent Honeyeater was here on Wurundjeri land. It was when I was a kid. There was a report, even then, a report of Regent Honeyeater, although they still bred in Melbourne almost every year. I think they stopped, the last breeding was in the late 70s, but a few years later, word of a Regent Honeyeater showing up in a garden in Hawthorne had all of us little twitchers. I went with the big twitchers. I was a kid, but I went along and we saw this magnificent, beautiful bird in a suburban park and garden. And one of the weird things about seeing this rare bird was that it was actually calling like a little wattle bird. And nobody understood why it was doing that. But with all the research that we've done since, we now know why. And we might actually talk about that throughout the course of today's webinar. My most recent encounter was I saw the nest tree of a pair in Wiradjuri country in the Captivity Valley last weekend. Unfortunately, that pair had just abandoned the nest a few days before. I was up there as a guest of the Captivity Valley Bird Festival, as was my colleagues from the Woodland Birds team, who are going to speak to you tonight about their research. And you don't really want to hear me talking about this. You want to see the work that these two titans in woodland bird conservation have done. Yes, I'm calling you titans, both of you. Yes, tonight we're joined by Mick Roderick, who may be familiar to many of you on this call, if you've been involved in any Regent Honeyeater work over the last 20 years, essentially. Mick is our Regent Honeyeater Recovery Advisor. That's his role at BirdLife, but he's actually the chair of the Regent Honeyeater Recovery Team. Is that correct? No, coordinator.
Yeah, I'm the coordinator. So there is a chair, but the coordinator is the one that sort of makes sure that things happen. The chair chairs the meetings. That's the important part.
Right, excellent. Yeah, that's the key. And Mick is joined by his colleague Kristy Peters, who is our Woodland Birds Project Coordinator. Both Mick and Kristy are based in the Hunter Valley, Newcastle area, and so are fortunate enough to have relatively close access to the two of the key remaining sites for Regent Honeyeaters. They are, for those of you who don't know, we have, I'm in the BirdLife office in Melbourne, and we do have, if I can, like a weather map. There's an old drawing of a Regent Honeyeater. You're going to see much better impressions of that bird now, but they are a spectacular bird. They are a critically endangered bird with, we think, as few as 350. And I liken the fight to save the Regent Honeyeater to, given its grand final week and finals week in the NRL and the AFL. Basically, we've been playing this match, and we have been playing a match to save the Regent Honeyeater from extinction. The work that we've done, I would say, meant that we've got to extra time. But we are at that critical point where we are now facing the extinction of this incredible bird. The actions we have taken at BirdLife and the community have kept this bird alive as a species, but it is so critical that we act now before we see this glorious creature disappear off the face of the earth. So I'm going to share with you, I'm going to invite Mick to talk first about Regent Honeyeater conservation, about what's happened to this species, what we're doing about it, and what the future looks like it. So Mick, if you'd like to take away, I'm all ears.
Great. Thanks, Sean. And yeah, thanks everyone. I'm, I guess, looking for that golden goal, I suppose. That's the golden point to score in extra time that the species is in. So I just wanted to acknowledge I'm sitting on a Wabakal country, and a lot of the work that I'll be talking about, as Sean mentioned, Wiradjuri, but also Wonnarua country. So I'm going to start the talk by giving a bit of context just quickly, because the Regent Honeyeater is an inhabitant of our temperate woodlands in southeastern mainland Australia. And those woodlands are incredibly diverse. In fact, there are many species that do not use any other habitat type apart from those woodlands, and we call them obligate woodland birds. Now, as a guild of birds, so we've heard about shorebirds, and we know that seabirds as a family of birds are threatened. Same with woodland birds. And if you look at that, those couple of maps there, the one on the left is basically what I'm talking about when I refer to southeastern temperate Australia, and that map on the right shows the amount of vegetation that has been lost in that part of the country, and it's roughly somewhere between 85 to 90% of our temperate woodlands have been lost, and importantly, of that 10 to 15 that's left, most of that is highly fragmented and doesn't actually serve as habitat for birds like that you can see on your screen, such as turquoise parrots and hooded robins. So of this guild of birds, and there could be anything up to 40 or 50 species of declining birds in our woodlands, the two at the top of the ladder of threat are the Regent Honeyeater and swift parrot, and both of those are listed as critically endangered at the top level under the IUCN threat list categories, and basically after critically endangered comes extinct in the wild. So it's as serious a position that a species can basically be in. So Sean's already mentioned that the total population size is about 350. If you look at that graph there, the blue bars tell you how many birds we actually accounted for when we decided to start doing biannual surveys and counts of Regent Honeyeaters. And the reason that we did it on two particular weekends across the year was that, you know, we had to coordinate to make sure that we weren't double counting birds. And just even the concept of double counting Regent Honeyeaters is just yeah, that is such a foreign concept nowadays. We can go many months without knowing where there is a single bird. But you can see there that there were 1,500 birds accounted for back in the mid-90s, and that's 4 or 5 times the entire population estimate now. So it's been a very slippery and rapid slide down the threat slope for Regent Honeyeaters. So why this drastic decline? It's a good question, because the same time that Regent Honeyeaters have lost 85 to 90% of their habitat, a number of other birds have as well, but they haven't declined as much. But the key driver, as in with just about any threatened species, is loss of habitat. That's the first thing that happens before other threats sort of come into play. And there's another visual there just showing again how the western slopes of New South Wales in particular have just been absolutely annihilated, such that we only have a small amount of these habitats left. And just using the Bundarra-Barraba key biodiversity area, so this is up west of Armidale in the central tablelands in New South Wales, northwest slopes in New South Wales. This was recognised as a key biodiversity area for its importance to Regent Honeyeaters, and those yellow dots on that map are Regent Honeyeater records. And I've just put there that this could be the last contemporary stronghold to fall. You know, this part of New South Wales, along with northeast Victoria, we really just are not seeing many regents in these regions that literally only 10 years ago, were still considered strongholds of the species. And if we zoom in, you can kind of see why. I mean, these are the sorts of landscapes that Regent Honeyeaters were just hanging on in. Extremely linear type habitat that is basically travelling stock reserves quite often, and small remnants like that one on the left there. So I guess the birds that were living in places like the Barraba region could have been living on borrowed time, just given how highly fragmented the landscape is. And the way that I sort of perceive that is it's been a slow erosion of their habitat and their range, really. So when that happens, the problem of habitat loss can be exacerbated by other things. And with Regent Honeyeaters, their lifestyle choice, their modus operandi has always been to wander around looking for the really rich patches. Similar to koalas having their favourite trees to browse on the leaves of, Regent Honeyeaters have their favourite trees: white box, yellow box, mugger ironbark inland, spotted gum and swamp mahogany on the coast, and of course mistletoe, as we'll see. But when you're that fussy and you are moving through the landscape and your numbers are dwindling and you're basically flying between patches that are there no longer and being dominated by some of these species we're seeing here, including, in particular, I guess, noisy miners. The poor old noisy miner, I know, he gets blamed a lot, but they are actually problems at Regent Honeyeater breeding sites where they never actually existed before. We've created the environment for them to flourish in, and now Regent Honeyeaters are encountering noisy miners. We have in these fragmented landscapes an unusually high number of nest predators such as currawongs and things like brush-tailed possums. And of course, some of our larger and aggressive honeyeaters are, they never were a problem, but just because they want to guard their trees, they are now, we are finding that they're driving some of our regents away from important feed trees. So it's not just a drop in population, it's also been a drastic reduction in range. So that map there is from the recovery plan in 2016, and basically the sort of the darker pink areas there are mapped as the range of the bird. That's an extremely generous range map for Regent Honeyeaters only 9 years later. You can see some of the important areas, some of the KBAs are actually mapped there. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to very quickly toggle through. So this data has come from our sightings database. I'm going to start as early as 1989. I'm just going to toggle through reports from most years. Sometimes there might be a gap of a couple of years that I've skipped to save on time. But in particular, I just want you to take notice of what happens sort of to the northern extreme and the southern extreme of their range, and what happens around the Blue Mountains. So over time, and those dots are actually large aggregations of birds. And you can see sort of by around the end of around 2000, some of the dots in particular are getting smaller in Victoria, and there seems to be a concentration of birds around the edge of the Blue Mountains. And yeah, that in 2007 there were no records in our database anyway from Victoria. And you can see, like a year like 2014, even right across the range, we only had one flock of more than 5 birds. So those dots are getting smaller everywhere. But yeah, just to map the last few years out again, you can see just about 90% of Regent Honeyeaters nowadays, and I'm talking literally contemporary, the last 10 years. Last year, we had 106 regents reported to us, and 92 of those were on the periphery of the Greater Blue Mountains. And it's also the only place that we're actually witnessing breeding. So there's something about the Greater Blue Mountains that's been, that has enabled the regents to cling on. And these are now by far the three most important contemporary breeding sites. The Captivity Valley, which is fair to say is the species stronghold, and that's where we were just on the weekend. Unfortunately, that nest there had failed, but the birds are still around, so hopefully they'll build another nest soon. And not far to the north from the Captivity, in a very similar landscape, is the Upper Hunter, basically the catchment of the Goulburn River. So the Goulburn River flows west into the Hunter and actually makes up 40% of the entire catchment of the Hunter Valley. The rest of the Hunter is quite moist, except for the north-facing gullies and things down near Cessnock. And so you can kind of make out on that aerial photo, there's quite a bit of vegetation around Cessnock, and that's because of the fact that there were underground coal mines, and that area is called the coalfields. And those mines actually needed forests on the surface so that they could harvest them for timber, for pit props and stuff like that, just to keep the mines going. So as it's kind of it's an interesting situation that we have underground coal mining to think that we have these very large remnants on the floor of the Lower Hunter. So there's been a recovery team in action for just over 30 years, and the latest iteration of the recovery plan is coming up to 10 years old. So a couple of years ago, the Australian National University undertook what's called a population viability analysis, and that's basically taking all the data that we could get, putting it through the sausage machine, churning it up, and out the other end a number of, it's basically mapping out the future of the species. And so what this PVA showed for regents, 2 things. If we're going to save this bird, we need to increase their nest success. We need to protect the nest and stop the currawongs and the possums taking off with the fledglings or the eggs. And we need to release zoo-bred birds, at least 100 birds every 2 years. So just to give some context about nest protection and why it's so important, this is a little video clip I took in the Tamalpin woodlands in October 2021. So yeah, just apologies to the people that get motion sickness. I'm hand holding a SLR camera. So that there is a Regent Honeyeater chick. We'd found the nest the afternoon before, and we went in literally the next morning to check on the nest. Couldn't see the nest, no nest in the tree, and suddenly we noticed this poor little thing on the track, and eventually poor old confused dad comes back down with some food. There he is there. Um, so this story has a good news, well, a good ending, happy ending, because we rescued that chick, and that chick now is at Taronga Zoo, and she's churning out chicks herself. So that's, and that there is the nest. So presumably what had happened was overnight that nest was predated. Whatever it was that predated the nest took one of the chicks, and the other one fell onto the ground. Now, we can go some years without finding a single nest, and we go some, on average, we might get 5 or 6 nests a year. So we cannot afford to be losing precious Regent Honeyeater chicks like that. So this is some footage taken with a night vision camera in Chiltern in 2015. That's a sugar glider, and that there was an incubating female Regent Honeyeater, and there's the glider helping itself to some Regent Honeyeater eggs. And lastly, that's an image there. There's a Regent Honeyeater reho circled in the middle there. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but here's a raven flying in, and there's the Regent Honeyeater nest. And this literally happened in the captivity last year. These are contemporary threats. So what do? We put trunk guards around trees in an effort to try and keep possums away. You can see those photos we've managed to get with other cameras, that it does work sometimes. That possum bottom right is actually coming down the tree. So that one has managed to outsmart it. There's a goanna trying to get up that other tree there. We haven't actually got evidence of them taking the eggs, but I'm quite sure that does happen. So apart from predation, the other thing is the resource competition and the hyper aggressive noisy miner. So it's hard to believe, but there were noisy miners in those landscapes that I'm showing there in the Widden Valley, both and the Goulburn River. So we've actually been in there and we have removed noisy miners from those landscapes, and they are both contemporary Regent Honeyeater breeding sites. And because of the nature of those landscapes, you can see that they're quite linear, and noisy miners don't sort of infiltrate the area after we've removed them, and we're finding that we're having really good breeding success at the places where we do the noisy miner controls, and in fact it's probably the thing that we do for Regent Honeyeaters that has the most immediate benefit. When you take noisy miners out of a landscape, every other species there breathes a sigh of relief, and it's actually something that has immediate impact. And that's a close-up of the raven that I showed there along the Captivity River. That's him there taking the eggs. And as I say, there is a contemporary threat that we just can't afford. Dr. Janet Gardner sent me this short video clip of a nest protection cage that they made for Jackie Winters. You can see how easily the Jackie Winter makes it back into the nest. So we're having to consider doing stuff like that. So the captive release program, vitally important. First chicks were taken from nests back in 1995. So this has been happening for 30 years. There was a small release in the Captivity Valley in 2000, but nowadays, so the vast majority of releases now have been happening in Victoria and New South Wales. So Taronga Zoo are our key partner when it comes to the husbandry and the breeding of the captive population. The reason we keep them into captivity, I guess, is twofold. One, that we make sure that they disappear off the planet altogether, and the other is to do what we do here, and that's supplement the critically low population by releasing zoo-bred birds. So the first 5 large-scale releases were done in Chiltern, and the theory there was that we were going to supplement the low wild population at the southern edge of their range. And there was success. Birds did breed. There was evidence of survival, but there wasn't any evidence of population recovery. So the recovery team decided around in 2019 that we would start releasing into the core of the birds' range. And so now the large scale, the largest scale release site that we use regularly is the Tamalpa woodlands, and that, as you can see, is quite unique. It's very different to the other places where Regent Honeyeaters breed, because this is a very large unfragmented remnant. There are no noisy miners basically in that bush, and there is an incredible diversity of eucalypts. There's 29 species of gum trees. 2 of them are yet to be described. So at any given time, there's something flowering, and of course the mistletoe flowers in spring. So where we did the first release in Tamalpin in 2021, it's important to know that this happens on land owned by Minderibba Local Aboriginal Land Council, and it's on Wonnarua country. And there's Minderibba's CEO, Tara Deva, giving us an impassioned talk about the significance of this site to Wonnarua people. But before that, Uncle Richard Edwards had welcomed us there in Wonnarua language. And it's believed that that is the first time that a crowd of people had been addressed in language on that land in 150 years. So the Regent Honeyeater has almost become famous worldwide, of being the bird that's losing its love song, and Sean sort of touched on that earlier. So what we're finding is that lone males are wandering off, and they're not assimilating with other Regent Honeyeaters. They're assimilating with with other regions. Yeah, so they're assimilating instead with other large honeyeaters, and they're the calls that they're learning. And even kids' books and Behind the News are in on this, and I recommend the Behind the News story. It's really, really well done. And so on this land where we're releasing Regent Honeyeaters, the land of the Wonnarua people, the Wonnarua language is on the verge of extinction itself. So there's these amazing parallels between trying to restore a language in a bird, or the song of a bird, and reawaken a language. And we've had a story aired on the project, and I would recommend, it's only about a 12-minute segment. I would recommend checking that out. And so in 2021, at our first release, we have plenty of nesting attempts, but we only have one successful nest, and there they are there. Absolutely awesome to see them successfully breeding. And wild birds stuck around. We had a couple of big roosts of wild and zoo birds mixing together, which is exactly what you want. Wild birds were in these forests for nearly 12 months, which just does not happen anywhere else, trust me. And we've done 2 more subsequent releases on Tamalpin on Wonnarua country. Just got some photos here that I'm showing, because these are, although these birds are bred in captivity, they know exactly how to catch a protein meal. And this video here shows one of our birds taking ants from a branch, and you see one dropped and he chases another one there. So none of these ants get away. They're very good. And so last year we did a release on the strength of spotted gum. So this wasn't a spring release like the other 2 Tamalpin releases had been. And we actually had one of our female birds join a flock of wild male birds. And in the meantime, back at the release site, there had been swift parrots, and these zoo birds, they didn't take a liking to the swifties and saw them off rather quickly. This is a pretty amazing story. One of our birds that we released last year was found literally in the middle of nowhere at a place called Putty. So that land to the east is the Lower Hunter, and to the west, those dots there are the Captivity valleys. So this bird, it looks like he knew where he was going. We didn't subsequently see him, but it seems like he was headed for the Captivity. So that's one way of releasing birds, is to release a large number. We also do, or have done, a trial, a small release, where we found lone males, and what the theory is there, that we release mostly females in an effort to get them to pair with the lone males. But in the lead up to that breeding season, we found 2 females in the Captivity that had been released at Tamalpin. Both were paired with wild males, and RMPP there, she was famous in 2021 as being the female that failed the most number of times, but lo and behold, spring 2023, 2 years of experience out there, I guess, she paired with a wild male, and she got 2 chicks out of her nest, which is just amazing. That bird we saw before turned up on the Widden, again, a female with a wild male. Just flicking through because I'm just mindful of time. We've had a number of birds seen post 12 months out of release, which is kind of that's the yardstick we use for a released bird then being treated as a wild bird. And special mention for white mauve red metalworm. He's a bird that was released in Chiltern back in April 2015. He's still getting around Wangaratta. In fact, he was seen last week. So that guy's been out for a very long time. And an exciting development happened last year where we had a flock of 12 birds comprised of 3 zoo and 9 wild. And one of those females from that flock was subsequently found in the Upper Hunter. So we've got birds moving around this landscape and the females are finding the lone males. So it's absolutely what we want to happen. And the nest tree that Sean mentioned earlier, that's it there. And that's the female of that pair is actually a bird that we released literally in the Captivity Valley 2 years ago. And again, she'd found an unpaired male, a male that would have otherwise probably, not paired and be singing little wattlebird calls. Who knows? But okay, so just to finish on the release work, we've had a lot of evidence of assimilation. So basically, zoo birds being found away from the release sites, they all records except 2 instances, the zoo birds have been with wild birds. So if people can hear that, that's what the birds generally sound like at release. So the zoo birds, because Regent Honeyeaters have the ability to make other calls, their calls are not quite spot on. This is what they should sound like. Quite different. Bit of a soft chuckle. So 2 of these birds in this wild flock last year in the Lower Hunter sounded like those zoo birds at release. But because we assume, and that's one of those zoo birds, it has spent time with wild male birds. So it has actually picked up the wild song from those birds, which is just, it's an amazing development. And we are actually tutoring the young males at Taronga to make sure that they do sound like the real thing. But we have seen now that if they find wild birds, that they can learn from them. All right, so the last part of my talk, how can you guys help? Well, to be honest, really, the main help that we need is actually finding birds. We've been saying for many years now if you ever suspect or you have seen or perhaps heard a Regent Honeyeater, to report that to BirdLife Australia. So that there on the screen is on our website. Just Google how to report a Regent Honeyeater or Regent Honeyeater BirdLife and you'll find your way there. We've got a YouTube video on how to spot them. We've just done up a new batch of fridge magnets. Great to have this stuff on your fridge in case you forget what they look like and who to contact. And of course, we've got identification guides. Periodically, we produce a community update just to let people know what's happening in the world of Regent Honeyeaters. If you're not on that email list, contact us and we'll get you on there. So finally, this it's part of this webinar was to officially launch the new Regent Honeyeater portal in Bird Data. Bird Data is the way which bird, 2 separate words, bird data gets into the BirdLife Australia Atlas, and that screen grab there on the left is from the phone, and one on the right is from the PC. So just very quickly, when you go into Bird Data, you hit Record Survey, you scroll down, you find the Regent Honeyeater module, you choose a location and hit Record Survey. Then before you record your sightings, you're actually asked about the habitat that's in the area. And we've actually built in an ID guide for both Eucalypts and for Mistletoe to help you through when you're actually selecting what trees are in a different area. And hopefully we'll have some entries like this, which is a zoo bird that I found earlier this year. So I think that's my time up. And as I understand it, we'll be taking questions at the end. So back to you, Sean.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Mick. And thank you for launching the Regent Honeyeater portal. And for those of you who are thinking what you can do, like what Mick says, we need to know where they are. That's so important. And the predecessor of bird data was absolutely vital for kickstarting Regent Honeyeater conservation. It wasn't really like when I started bird watching as a kid in the 80s, all the bird books still talked about Regent Honeyeater as being moderately common. But that was based on sightings because they used to turn up. People were used to seeing Regent Honeyeaters in flocks of hundreds. They'd turn up in places like Bendigo or Maryborough in Victoria, some years in their hundreds, and then another year out near Dubbo, they would come into street trees and eat fruit from people's backyards. So people were used to seeing them, but then also used to not seeing them for a few years at a time because they moved around. And it wasn't until we had the first atlas of Australian birds in 1977 to 1981 that suddenly having all of that reports, all of those reports, all that data in the one place, the people at BirdLife's predecessor organisation were able to say, well, hang on, people aren't seeing Regent Honeyeaters at Warwick in Queensland. They're not seeing Regent Honeyeaters in that 4 years period in the Mount Lofty ranges. There's very few records at Bendigo. There's none in Dubbo. And suddenly they realised it wasn't just a matter of the regions going elsewhere. The regions weren't there to be seen. And that really kick-started the whole conservation effort. So it is vital that we get that information, as Mick said. So hopefully you'll be inspired to go out and search for your own regions, because it is to see a Regent Honeyeater in the wild. They look beautiful in those photos, but to see them in that Australian sunshine is one of the most glorious things you'll see in the bush. So thank you very much for that, Mick. I'm sure, like me, lots of people have got questions, but we'll hold them to the end. You can put your questions in the Q&A. That's how we'll moderate the questions at the end. But after you hear our next speaker, Kristy Peters, talk about her work, especially with mistletoe, you're going to have even more questions. So Kristy, I'd like to hand it over to you, and really looking forward to hearing what you've got to say. Still on mute there.
Sorry about that. I'm just going to stop sharing and go back here. How are we going there? Okay, now I've just got to go in here and get this on presentation mode. I think I'm good. Sorry about this. We practice this, and as always, give me one more second to shut that one down.
That's okay, Kristy. For those who were at our last webinar, you would know that we had no visuals. People just looked at me holding a phone talking to our guests. So you're already miles ahead.
All right, how am I going now?
You were getting it up, it just wasn't your first slide, that's all.
Okay.
That's why you're doing that, Sean. Yeah, you're right that we didn't actually really know about, or we had it confirmed, I guess, during the first atlas. But back in '95, when there were still over 1,000 birds reported, we still then wanted people to report sightings. I guess then it was more of just keeping a track of where birds were, but now it's a case of we can't save a bird that we don't know where they are. So that's really the situation that we're in with Regents. Is we can go a year with no nests. So all right, Kristy's.
I got it sorted now.
Yeah, that looks great.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mick, for filling in there. It's fantastic. So yes, my name's Kristy Peters and work with Mick. I've worked with Mick for the last 6 years now in the Woodland Birds team, and have been really just amazed what I've learned about mistletoe over the last 6 years, and also about Regent Honeyeaters. So I'd love to take you through my project work that has really focused on mistletoe propagation at one of those key breeding sites, the Tamalpam woodlands that Mick was speaking about. And I'd just like to mention this beautiful photo that was taken in the Captivity Valley. And this is a beautiful Regent Honeyeater feeding on needleleaf mistletoe. Needleleaf mistletoe, one of the key species that this beautiful bird uses when it's breeding. And these mistletoe species are often timed perfectly when the adults have got chicks in the nest and they're needing that really sugary, sugar-rich hit to keep them going while they're raising their little youngsters in the nest. Now, I'd just like to acknowledge, as Mick said, we've been working with Minjerribah Local Aboriginal Land Council for many years. And I've been really so fortunate to be welcomed onto their country. And this is a project of this is a picture of from our project of their ranger team doing some mistletoe planting, getting it up into the canopy of some of the regenerating spotted gum. That's, you know, a key species, also a key species. So you've got the spotted gum providing the eucalypt blossom, but also you've got the mistletoe that we've been planting into it. So we get kind of like a double hit for the Regent Honeyeaters, putting this important food resource back up into the canopy where it's been lost through fire. And I'd just like to acknowledge the Wanneroo people, as well as Tara Devar from Minjerribah Lauk, for all of the efforts and all of the help she's provided to allow us to come on and do this project, which is quite near the release site that Mick was talking about. And we've had environmental trust funding and other various funding over the years from different levels of government to support our work. So what I'd like to do through my talk is just to bust the myths about mistletoe quickly. Many of you may come already knowing quite a lot about the biodiversity benefits of mistletoe, but others really might not know too much at all. So I'll spend just a little bit of time hopefully changing some misconception, or proving that there's generally misconceptions around mistletoe, and it's actually just an amazing kind of superhero of the plant world that does so much for our native birds. I want to touch a little bit on cultural significance of mistletoe and its biodiversity benefits, of course, but also its importance to the Regent Honeyeater. Show you some key diagnostic features for a couple of the different mistletoe species, so that when you're out hopefully doing these Regent Honeyeater searches in bird data, you'll also be able to have a bit of knowledge of the mistletoe that you're also looking for, and you can report your sightings to us as well through the app. I'd love to tell you just the case study of the work that we've been doing. We are trialling some other species of mistletoe as well, but I want to just report mostly on the findings of our key project in the Tamalpam woodlands tonight. And then I'd love to also explain to you what are the practical tips. How can you actually pick and plant mistletoe yourself? And what are some ways you can get involved with the mistletoe propagation work we've been doing? So just quickly, the first one that we hear all the time is that mistletoe is a tree killer. Okay, so you would actually say that it would be a very silly life strategy for mistletoe if they just attached and then not long after killed their host. They actually need their host alive. It's not in their interest to kill it. And so mistletoes are what's called a hemiparasite. They make their own food through photosynthesis. So they've got green leafy surface of their leaves that can photosynthesize, but they actually put out a little tap root. It's not a true root, but a little tap type root that burrows into the bark, and then it establishes that connection to the xylem into the host, where it can actually tap into the water, and it just uses what it actually needs to survive, and it can also take up some of the nutrients of the host tree. But in healthy bushland, most host trees live for decades with mistletoe, and this is sort of what that graphic is showing, that if a tree has, in a healthy environment, it's got an understory, it's got healthy soils, it can actually have quite a few mistletoes attached and not really get into too much trouble. They have kind of like a bit of a symbiotic relationship there going on, where the mistletoe takes what it needs, but it does actually provide some benefits back to its host, which I'll explain. But isolated trees, on the other other hand, like that tree to the right, are doing really poorly. They don't, if they're on poor soils, don't have really deep-rooted, they don't have a deep-rooted structure there, and they've got no other sort of vegetation around them. They'll often get quite a lot of mistletoe on them, but the mistletoe is just a symptom, not the cause of the tree's death. Now, we also hear that because of Christmas traditions and the European mistletoe there on the left being associated with, sort of there's pagan traditions that are associated with it, as well as just general sort of commercial Christmas traditions, decorations that you can buy in the shop. So when you see that, though, that is just the only one mistletoe that occurs in Europe. But there's actually over 1,600 species that occur worldwide on all continents except for Antarctica. And we're lucky enough to have over we'll probably be on over 100 soon, I hope, with more work that's being done. But we have nearly 100 native Australian mistletoe species, like the one on the right, the long-flowered mistletoe fruit, which is the one that we've done the most work on. So mistletoe has evolved over 50 million years. It's been there as part of our natural ecosystems and is just as Australian as our acacias and our Eucalypt species. So I think it deserves a lot more appreciation that it generally gets. We also hear, all mistletoes look the same. A lot of people see what we see in Australia as the box mistletoe. It's often seen roadside trees, isolated paddock trees, and often on trees, unfortunately, that aren't looking too well. But generally, we have incredible mistletoe diversity. We have significantly more mistletoe species than any other country in the world. And worldwide, mistletoe occurs in 5 different groups that have evolved to be, separate on the taxonomic lineages. But we have 2 of those main groups in Australia. And so we've got the bright, showy mistletoes, like the ones up the top and in the right-hand corner. So the box mistletoes, needle leaf mistletoe and long flowered, all important for Regent Honeyeaters. But then we have some, like the one down the bottom left, the Currajong mistletoe, that are very cryptic species, often with dense canopies in their host trees. They'll just blend in. And that can also be the case with the needle-leaf mistletoe that mimics the host, or its host, the casuarina, and often has leaves that look superficially very similar to its host, but you only really notice that they're there when you get the flowering coming on, and they really stand out at that time and draw in lots of birds and insects. So definitely don't all look the same. Next one we get asked about a lot is that it doesn't have any benefits for the host tree, does it? It's just basically there. It's parasite. It's living off the host, but it's not giving the host anything in return. Well, over the last 20 to 30 years, studies by researchers like Professor David Watson from Charles Sturt University and many other researchers that he's worked with have found, and colleagues all across Australia now, have found that mistletoe are keystone species where they occur. Really, they sort of disproportionately affect the ecosystem that they're in. And if they're taken away, there's a lot of flow-on effects for those ecosystems that are generally a negative flow-on effect. So our native mistletoes not only provide the fruit and the nectar, but their foliage and the structure of the horstorium, that's where the mistletoe starts the connection point with the host and creates like a ball. I'll show photos of that, but you'll see the horstory ball. And that's what this Regent Honeyeater has actually built its nest on top of. So it's built its nest in a long-flowered mistletoe clump, one of its favourite foraging resources. You can see some flower there. So it's got a safe, protected nest site right next to a key resource that it can forage on, which is important for conserving their energy when they're raising very hungry chicks. And some papers that have been done, one of them in particular found that there's documented evidence of bird species in Australia, 245 of them actually nesting either regularly or on occasion in mistletoe clumps. So, there's over 800 species of birds that regularly, that are resident in Australia or regularly use Australia as part of their range. So to have more than a quarter of the species in Australia using mistletoe to some extent just goes to show how important it is. And not only not just the threatened Regent Honeyeater, but the vulnerable painted honeyeater. So one of our other threatened honeyeater species is a key exploiter and also disperser of mistletoe fruit. I'll have some photos to show you of that in a moment. And there's a lot of insect association with mistletoe, which is beyond the scope of this talk, but there are definitely other people who have more an entomological background that know a lot more about butterflies and other moths and other insects that have another sort of symbiotic relationship with mistletoe and lay their eggs on mistletoe hosts. So it's pretty fascinating stuff. The leaf litter also is another really interesting facet of it, dropping lots of leaf litter beneath its host and enriching the soil and attracting a lot of insects into that site where around the tree. So it not only supports nectar and fruit eating birds, but it supports insect eating birds too to come below the tree where there's that rich leaf litter. And I guess one of the key things is that some people think that mistletoe actually reduces biodiversity. I suppose definitely in areas where they see it in isolated paddock trees. But all of the research that has been done generally shows that mistletoe is actually boosting biodiversity. It acts like a supercharger to the environment that it is occurring in. And trees that have more mistletoe are attracting more birds. They're attracting mammals such as brush-tailed possums, gliders, koalas. So mammals will often eat the foliage of the mistletoe. It has quite a lot of, it's a fleshy sort of content. So it's got water and nutrients in there that they're after, so they can supplement their diet with mistletoe leaves. And then you've got some of these beautiful honeyeater species and even musk lorikeet down the bottom there that will come in for the blossom. And so they're actually acting to enrich the food webs where they occur and creating this diverse habitat for a whole heap of species. And I just wanted to touch briefly on the cultural significance of mistletoe. So more is being learnt over the years, and as different Aboriginal groups are connecting more with their language, but it's definitely familiar to Indigenous people throughout mainland Australia. And this species here, one of the box mistletoe, it was particularly known by the name of snotty gobbles. That was a name that was like lots of Aboriginal kids would know it by. You can chew it like fruit. So that's a key distinction with the Australian species, that they're not poisonous. You can actually eat mistletoe and have a little taste, and they've got some various flavours. Some people say that they taste a bit like a sweet oyster. Other people have said different species taste a bit like lychee, to give you a bit of an idea of what they might taste like. And Aboriginal people used it a bit like chewing gum to provide saliva and quench their thirst when they were walking, as a bit of a bush snack, more of a treat than anything. And the leaves have quite a lot of compounds in them that can be bruised and grinded in with grinding stones and soaked in water, and that tonic then can be taken to treat fever and cold and all sorts of ailments, and you can also make the leaves into a poultice to treat external sores and other lesions and things like that. So it was well known, the benefits of mistletoe to Aboriginal people. So I just wanted to briefly touch on some work that Mick was talking about in terms of the range-wide Regent Honeyeater surveys that we do. So a few years back, Mick and the team were out there not only looking for Regent Honeyeaters, but collecting data on where mistletoe occurred and the kind of condition it was in at the time, whether it was alive, dead, other evidence of, use by other species. And that provided a really great data set so we could have a look at, how was mistletoe doing out there in the environment. And we actually found a few years ago, with the really bad droughts that we were suffering at that time, that not only the host trees, but the mistletoe was declining. And so obviously that has flow-on effects to threaten nectar-feeding birds like the Regent Honeyeater as we face climate extremes moving forward. So we really need to sort of keep in the back of our mind how our local mistletoe populations are doing as well, because they're providing those cooler microclimates for birds to nest in. Sometimes mistletoe clumps can be up to 3 degrees cooler than the ambient sort of temperature or the temperature in the adjoining canopy. So that is going to be important for small birds in the coming years, where we're going to be facing these more frequent heat waves. And the dense clumps are also thought to provide some extra level of protection from predation from some of those species that Mick was showing in the previous slides. So just to get people's eye in on long-flowered mistletoe, this is a species that flowers in spring and generally fruits in summer. So perfect timing for Regent Honeyeaters. And you can see in that middle slide there, the middle image there from PlantNet, that's where long-flowered mistletoe generally grows. So it's well within the range of the Regent Honeyeater and provides that food source as it moves around the landscape. And these are just some images to show they eat the blossom. They've got a perfectly shaped bill to fit within some of those tubular flowers. And then on the right is a picture of a male up there looking down into the nest that's on top of that horstorium that I mentioned before, the woody ball that attaches to the host plant. So has lots of uses for Regent Honeyeaters within their range. Now, this is another one that we're keen to keep trialling. It's a bit of a tricky one to be able to find the fruit at the right time of the year and be able to plant it into the host. But we're going to keep working on it and see if we can sort of get a handle on it. We feel like we've got a handle on long-flowered mistletoe, but this one, we'd be keen to know if you've got fruit sources at your fingertips that you can point us to, because we'd like to keep propagating it and trialling it. But it's a really widespread species and really important along riparian habitats for Regent Honeyeaters. So just some pictures there. This is an image on the left there of the Regent Honeyeater adult feeding 2 chicks in. So they've made the nest near mistletoe in river oak, Casuarina Cunninghamiana there. And then, of course, the beautiful photo again with it eating the blossom. So the key part to the story is, how does the mistletoe get there in the first place? So we've got the little mistletoe bird here, an amazing, one of our smallest birds in Australia. And you can see there from the range map in the red, it occurs nearly all across the country, not in Tasmania and not in the sandy deserts that don't have any of the vegetation that would host mistletoe. The amazing thing about little mistletoe birds is that they can digest the fruit and then poop it out within 15 to 30 minutes of having eaten it. So we're going to watch a little video in a second just showing how that amazing process happens. But one key thing to note with mistletoe birds is they're seen more as an exploiter of the resource. They specialise in an area that has lots of mistletoe and spread it around in smaller areas, but don't necessarily move it into patches that don't have any mistletoe. They will keep going back to those resource-rich patches. So we do need other honeyeater species like striped honeyeater, spiny-cheeked honeyeater, and other coastal honeyeater species that will move it around into new areas. So I'm just going to play this little video to show you what their role is in the environment to spread it. So yeah, amazing stuff. And it's so sticky, that viscin, it's called viscin, is the coating over the seed, that even birds like the painted honeyeater below our little mistletoe man there that does the amazing work that we're trying to emulate, even the painted honeyeater has to use its beak to try to get it detached, or do the little bum wiggle dance that the mistletoe bird did to get it onto the host branch and start that process of germination. To the next one. So we hadn't really, it wasn't so much on our radar about doing this in a natural environment, but we did know about a City of Melbourne project that Professor David Watson had worked with that council to actually be planting mistletoe into plane trees, an exotic species of tree in urban Melbourne, and they're planting creeping mistletoe down there. And so this is an arborist wiping the seed. So you don't actually, the seed, as another misconception, doesn't have to pass through a bird to be able to be deposited. You can just collect the seed and wipe it yourself. And that's what they've done. And they've actually now got creeping mistletoe, which is pretty slow growing, but they've established it now on 5 out of the 28 trees. And they've had an 18% success rate of those clumps now surviving past about 4 or 5 years, and they've started to produce the first lot of fruit. So it's quite a successful example there of bringing mistletoe back into city landscapes, adding to the green infrastructure of our cities, and hopefully drawing back a lot more birds and butterflies into these areas, into exotic trees that don't really provide any of those resources for our native fauna. So just to quickly, don't need to go into too much detail because Mick has explained where our case study site is, just west of Newcastle. And we've had a knowledge sharing workshop with the local community to kick it off. This is us all out in the bush one day out there. We had Wanneroo elders there that day, the bushfire guys, National Parks and Wildlife Service, local bird clubs, and just local interested landholders so that we could get everyone on the same page of what we were trying to achieve with the project. And this is just going to be showing you an image here on the left there. I think Mick took this one when we'd had wildfires go through an area, and just show the devastation there of that fire. It stretched right up into the canopy and burnt 90% of the mistletoe resource. And the red on the right there, the red shading, is showing a fire extent burning across a lot of that habitat for the Regent Honeyeaters, being the green dots there. So we planted with the yellow dots back into one of the key areas that mistletoe, the Regent Honeyeaters kept coming back into, but we were unlikely to get mistletoe birds back spreading the resource into. So we needed to take sort of matters into our own hands and get the mistletoe back into this area. So it can take decades for that natural reseeding process to occur. And as you know, I mentioned before, climate change is only just going to exacerbate those threats. So we wanted to get on the front foot and get mistletoe back into there so that hopefully mistletoe birds will take over the job for us in the coming years. So as far as we know, it is actually a world first habitat restoration experiment. We started in 2020, and we've got local arborists and an Indigenous ranger team who are now well trained in how to plant mistletoe, both up in the canopy, climbing up there with the ropes, and also using a very low tech method of planting mistletoe with the pole, which I've got a picture of to show you later. And we're now into the next phase of monitoring the plantings to determine the survival into the future. So we've planted 4,500 seeds to date, and we've managed to take what we've learned and improve our success rate from 12 to 20% survival, so comparable with what Dave Watson's been doing down there in Melbourne. And we now know of at least 300 plants that have been established. And the species we've been planting, long-flowered mistletoe, it does grow a little bit faster, so we've got fruit in just 3 years of planting. And we've obviously talked to lots of people about mistletoe, which we'll continue to do. And I think one of the key deliverables is a propagation manual, which I'll talk about a little bit more a bit later in my talk. But what it will help you do is actually take all the learnings and tips and tricks so that you can give it a go in your garden or with the local land care group. So just showing the progression on the left there, and you saw that in the video where the little taproot came out and attached to the host, and then, you know, within a few weeks you'll start to get those first little leaves, and 18 months later and 3 years later you get that growth and eventually have a resource that's going to be providing fruit and flowers for our native bird life. Just a few photos of all the monitoring we've been doing out there, and I'll be getting out there before the end of the year to hopefully follow up and take some more shots of some of these mistletoes to see the growth rate in the last sort of 12 to 18 months. We do often get people comment, how is too much mistletoe, you know, as such, is that a thing? And it can be, you know, if you're worried about isolated paddock trees, you can do things like this where you could have a scissor lift or cherry picker up to actually remove some of the mistletoe. But generally it's just a symptom of a wider problem. If you've got a tree that's isolated from all of the rest of the bushland, you don't have the natural predators coming in like your insects and your brush-tailed possums that will will take care of a lot of the mistletoe load. It's also isolated from any natural fires that are going through the system. So generally you need to take a bit more of a long-term approach and see if you can do some plantings around trees that are a bit stressed and help them out that way. But some selective pruning could also be an option as well, which you could discuss with an arborist or maybe one of your natural a catchment management authority or local land service to get some advice. So this is the resource. We're going to put this in the chat so that you'll all have access to an online version of the propagation manual, and this will provide the step-by-step tips and tricks that I'm going to quickly explain. So that's one of the key deliverables, as well as training the Indigenous Ranger group from Minderibba about planting the mistletoe, and they have well and truly taken that on board, and they're running with it and have funding to keep going with it, which is one of the most sort of rewarding parts of the project for me. So just a few pictures here to show you. I've used a long pruning pole and snipped some of that mistletoe off and put it in a plastic bag. Take it home. You can put it in the fridge for a few days, but generally best to use it as quick as you can after you've used it, after you've picked it. Fresh is best. And then you can also just make up something very simple like a dowel pole from Bunnings, put a couple of, I found nails work better because the mistletoe sort of seemed to slide off them a bit better, but then you can reach up and wipe them over a branch and get them higher into the canopy that way. So these are just a few resources you might need. And this is just showing when you pick the fruit, they have the little stem still in place, but as soon as you break it open, you'll be able to pop the seed out and transplant it onto its host. And this is me here just wiping it onto the underside of a branch. That's quite a good spot as it allows dew to accumulate under the branch if it's a bit of in cooler weather or we've had a little light rain, and that'll help the seed actually get started, provide a little bit more water for it in the sort of coming days and weeks as it attaches to its host. And we're just putting it on thin branches generally. It tends to work better as they don't have the thicker bark of the bigger branches, and that can make it easier for that seed to get the right establishment. Also, think about light. Putting it in the outer canopy is generally better because the mistletoe does need that light to photosynthesize. So avoid the hot westerly side of the tree though, especially if you're planting in the hotter months of the year. It's a really good idea to mark where you put the mistletoe, because often if you just go and put a heap in a tree, that's fine if you're not worried too much about keeping an eye on it. But if you can do something like we've done with the photo here, you can mark the little spots with a little red dot, or if it's a tree low down, put a bit of flagging tape in it, come back in a few weeks and then a few months and just track the progress. And don't be disheartened if, 90% of them will germinate, but only about 10 to 20% of those 90% will survive to maturity. But it's just a numbers game, and it's really easy to do. So it's quite quick compared to, putting trees in the ground and things like that. You'll get heaps done in a day. You just sort of got to be patient and know that quite a lot of them aren't going to survive, but the ones that do should go on to be really healthy plants. So next steps for our project, this is the photo of our project team in the Captivity Valley, and we were trialling needle-leaf mistletoe there. We'll keep going with that. We've got some more monitoring to do, and we'll go on to develop further resources with Minderibba Local Aboriginal Land Council and hopefully publish a scientific paper after I've done the monitoring later in the year to share it more widely. So just to finish off, how you can get involved, I just want the take-home message to be that mistletoe is far from being a pest. It's a keystone species in the environments that it occurs. Taking it away has, quite negative flow-on effects to birds and animals and insects. And it's that cultural resource. It has that ongoing connection with Aboriginal groups, and it's a lifeline for our wildlife as we experience greater sort of floods, droughts, fires in coming years. So I would love if people watching today can spread the word. If they hear people sort of talking about mistletoe negative ways and propagating those myths, you can tell them what you've learned and bust some of those myths. You can also share your sightings in iNaturalist. If you are keen to do that and you've used iNaturalist before, check it out. There's a Mistletoes of Australasia page, and you can see lots of information about all 99 species of Australia's mistletoe on there. And I would just encourage people that, whether it's on your own properties or if you're part of a land care group, you can value the mistletoe that's in those bushland patches and and reserves, and take care of paddock trees by planting other vegetation around them, and just ensuring that birds like our Regent Honeyeater are going to have mistletoe there that's in a healthy state for many years to come. And I've just provided some further reading resources here. There are mistletoe field guides if you're super keen to learn more, and a range of webinars that you can search on YouTube. So thank you everyone for listening, and we'll be happy to take all your questions.
Thank you so much for that, Kristy. That just blows my mind. I never thought I would think of the mistletoe bird as the super pooper of the woodlands. And one thing that really strikes me about the work you're doing, it really goes to what I love about the position that BirdLife Australia sits in, is that we would love to have 50 Kristys out there doing this work, but our funding is always limited. It's limited by the tenure of the government grants. I know that Kristy's work was originally funded by the bushfire recovery stuff, and it's limited by the amount of donations we get in. But what BirdLife does in that situation where we don't have those resources to commit long term is that we have this role to bring together different communities, and so that work with the Mindaribba Rangers and with the propagation guide that you're mentioning, this is empowering and enabling people to take this sort of action locally right around the country. This is the stuff that makes me really proud to work with people like Kristy and Mick, is they've got innovative conservation solutions, adaptive and agile, but also sharing the knowledge and sharing the experience, and that's what they've done so beautifully tonight. I can see there's heaps of questions, so we'll kind of get stuck into it. I'll go through, and any that we don't answer, we've got about maybe about 15 minutes of questions. Any that we don't answer in the Q&A, we will type the answers to them. I'm making a promise on all our behalves there. So, but before we start, I just wanted to ask both of you, either one question or the other. When did you first see a Regent Honeyeater, or what is it about them that you love so much that you dedicate your working life to saving these birds? So I'll start with you, Kristy. When did you first see a Regent?
So I started going to the Captivity Valley tree planting that's been running now for 30 years. I think I first went in about 2007. And I can't remember the year, but I can definitely remember where I saw the first Regent Honeyeater. It was in a heavily flowering yellow box tree, one of the key resources there in the valley. And I think there was about 3 birds. I definitely got to see 2, but I can just remember the excitement of everybody that was there, and just how I just couldn't wait till I finally got my binoculars focused on the birds and got to see them. So yeah, the Captivity Valley back nearly 20 years ago. And I've been lucky, the biggest flock I've ever seen is 14 birds in the Hunter Valley. That Mick can definitely beat me on that.
And when did you first see them, Mick? And then boast about how many you've seen in your lifetime.
The first ones I saw were actually on the Singleton military training area, but I was on Broke Road. They were on the other side of the fence. There was some flowering spotted gum at the time. That was 98, showing my age a bit. But just to the why Regents. I guess, Sean, you can relate to this, and I'm sure that there are people out there that the birders amongst us, that there's a thrill about finding rare birds, right? And so, there are rare birds that legitimately just are out of range, for whatever reason. But when a rare bird is rare because it is disappearing, that's another story. And at the time, the coordinator, David Gearing, was desperately getting people to report these birds. And so I felt, because I just had this affinity with, getting into regents really made me read the landscape and notice when there's buds on trees and work out when those trees were going to flower. And knowing that if I hear little lorikeets or noisy firebirds somewhere, that means there's blossom. So, getting into regents, sort of had other purposes. I sort of developed as an ecologist and then it's now become a life obsession to try and save this bird.
Yeah, I'd share that. The first question that I'm seeing here, I think actually maybe I can answer this one because it's not specifically about regents, but it's asking how we can help if you're interstate, not within the current range of Regent Honeyeater. And you two both might like to comment on this, but what I would say is that regents used to occur from the Mount Lofty ranges in Adelaide. I'm not sure whether we know whether they actually moved out of that region to Western Victoria or not, whether that was an isolated population. But basically from Adelaide all the way through that woodland band, all the way up into southern Queensland to places like Warwick, Toowoomba, those sorts of areas. So if you're in one of those areas, you can still partake in this sort of woodland rehabilitation, protection, revegetation, because I like to think if we tend those gardens and we recover this species, imagine a time when there's enough Regent Honeyeaters to start backfilling the areas they once existed. So it's sort of an act of hope, I suppose, in the future that you make sure that the woodland in your area continues to exist, and try and connect it and enhance it as much as possible. But also, I'll put my hand up to say, this work, as I said, it's often precarious in terms of our funding that we have for projects like this, and it's reliant on BirdLife. Most of our work is reliant on incredible donors and supporters. And if you aren't in an area where you can do practical work for Regent Honeyeater, there are still a number of things you can do to help this project. Getting the word out, raising attention about what incredible birds these are and how precarious their existence is. I guess one call to action that I'm going to ask for is BirdLife Australia is running the Bird of the Year vote with The Guardian newspaper. The online, you can vote online. And as the person who is in charge of creating the short list of 50 species to vote for, I can guarantee after tonight that Regent Honeyeater is going to be one of those species. And we've actually said that we're demanding that The Guardian publish an article on them, because The Guardian's been incredibly supportive in the past of our conservation work, and in the 2021 Bird of the Year competition, their focus on Regent Honeyeaters actually raised so much awareness, and we need people to know about these incredible birds. So you can also do that. And of course, if you want to support BirdLife Australia's work with Regent Honeyeaters and an enormous range of threatened species, then there's always donations are always welcome. So see, I could do the money grubby money mentioning thing and leave you two pure scientists to talk about the science. So the next question: how easy is it to differentiate between male and females? You talk about how there's more males out there. How do you know?
It's a really good question, and it's something that happens in seabirds like albatrosses. A really old female wandering albatross can look like a male. They never stop aging, and it's the same with Regent Honeyeaters. So if we see a bird that generally has more warts, that's one of the features that we sort of attribute to males. It could mean that it's an old female. So I actually think the easiest way to pick a male and female Regent Honeyeater is behaviour, really. The males do 80 to 90% of calling. They're the ones that are far more aggressive, and they also seem to be the ones that end up on their own. And we have found that, whether it's a shortage of females or a surplus of males, it's hard to say, but it's probably a shortage of females. And we get asked, well, why is that? In most bird populations, there is a slight male bias, But in Regents, it's very unnatural. And when you think back to that video that I showed of the sugar glider creeping up the tree, that female got away, but quite often incubating females do not. And that's the same thing that's happening with swift parrots in Tasmania. They're succumbing to nest predation. The gliders aren't interested in her, they just want the eggs. But in the process of getting at the eggs, sometimes the females come a cropper.
I'm going to combine a couple of questions here into a general question. There was a few questions about the captive release and essentially asking how do you choose sites, what criteria for the releases, and could there be possibly populations of wild regents out there that you don't know about?
Oh, there's absolutely no doubt on the latter. It's basically what keeps me going. Because like I said, there are some years where we literally do not find a nest, but in the subsequent season we find birds that are in their first year. So obviously we're not finding all of the nests. And I think when you look at the Blue Mountains, where that's where they seem to be holding on, there are a myriad of gullies and things that could be supporting the birds. So the answer to that is most definitely a yes. There are birds that go unseen. As far as selecting a release site is concerned, there's a number of factors. Basically the quality of the forest, whether there's noisy miners present, access to water, distance from houses and roads, and disturbance, and a number of things. And to be perfectly honest, I really can't think of a better place than to Melbourne, because everywhere else that Regent Honeyeaters congregate, sort of further west, those landscapes are now fragmented. And even though we've kind of removed some of the noisy miners, we know for a fact that there are lots of possums and kookaburras and currawongs. And whereas within Tamalpin, it's like going back 200 years. There are so many small honeyeaters in that forest that would-be nest predators don't last long. They get seen off by the yellow tufted. So yeah, I really feel like we've found a place through which I'll call it the conduit, through which we're going to, like you said, Sean, our ultimate aim is to backfill the places that they've disappeared from. But to do that, we need to, put a stop to the potential extinction, return them back, and then branch out from the Blue Mountains and return them to the other areas.
Yeah, there's also a couple of questions here that, again, I'll combine them, to do with mistletoe and noisy miners. Firstly, the question is, are there other ways other than culling to make an area more favourable for Regent Honeyeaters than noisy miners? And the follow-up, which I'll put to you, Kristy, is if you propagate mistletoe, is that likely to increase noisy miners as well if it's another resource?
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I don't think we've got any real evidence to suggest that planting mistletoe would increase noisy miner occurrence. We don't really. I haven't seen noisy miners taking much of mistletoe blossom. Have you, Mick? Can you think?
Only grey
occasionally.
Mistletoe. Only, yeah.
I have a couple of photos. So they will come into it, but I don't think, it's sort of one of the key. They're very generalist in their foraging and things like that. So I can't, rule it out, but I don't really have a clear answer for that one.
I think my response to the first question might go part of the way in answering that. And it is a very difficult thing to tackle the noisy miner problem. And again, I reiterate that it's not their fault, but they are actually a problem. And in fact, they're such a problem that their impacts on woodland birds is enshrined in our national legislation as a key threatening process, and in New South Wales. So it is, the science is in. There's no doubt that where there are noisy miners, you get low diversity of other birds. To try and exclude them, one thing might be to try and infill plant an area that is just trees and grass. Noisy miners love trees and grass, and noisy miners are very home on the ground. So if you've got a very dense shrub layer, the noisy miners will often sort of move off and look for a more open sort of habitat. And if we're talking a more sort of suburban situation, I would discourage planting some of the really big showy grevilleas like your Robin Gordons and things like that, because the noisy miners just love them, and they will move into an area that has a lot of that sort of those sorts of shrubs. If you plant much smaller flower grevilleas, then they're not normally able to get their beaks into, and so you might get spinebills and things like that coming in. But overall, it is actually a pretty difficult thing to try and solve. And just to quickly hark back to the question about the mistletoe planting, no, I agree with Kristy. I don't think that would actually result. I mean, down the track, you could potentially get miners feeding in the blossom, but I think the benefits of the other birds coming in to those mistletoes far outweighs that risk. And in fact, we talk about mistletoe fairies. We see mistletoe in places where we're sure there's not many mistletoe birds, and we're sure there are people out there that are just picking fruit and wobbling on branches. And to be perfectly honest, if you do this in your backyard, they are very showy, beautiful flowers, and they'll bring small birds, honeyers, into your yard as well.
I've got another question here from Fern, who is 8, it looks like. Which is something I was wondering too, Fern. Is she asking, could one of the reasons that Regent Honeyeaters like nesting in mistletoe is that it can be cooler than elsewhere? Is that an advantage of mistletoe? They're thicker. Are they cooler?
Yeah, there's more and more work that's being done to show that mistletoe creates a microclimate that's a lot cooler than the outside canopy. So people have actually put temperature loggers inside the clumps and compared it just with the ambient temperature. And I think there's going to be more research coming out that shows it's actually more beneficial than what I probably stated, but up to about 3 degrees cooler inside the clump. But it's also probably more humid because the mistletoe leaves have their stomata, the little openings within the leaves, are constantly releasing like a water vapor into the air. And so if it's a hot day and you're a little bird, you go inside a mistletoe clump, it's kind of like having the air conditioning on inside that little clump. So it's not just little birds too. You get owls and even birds of prey that will take sort of refuge through the day on really hot days. So I think if you're out on a hot day looking for birds, try to go and have a look inside some of the mistletoe clumps, and they might be taking a break in there.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Am I right in thinking sometimes I see mistletoe in the bush and it seems like there's more vegetation on the ground below? Is that a thing, or am I just making stuff up?
Yeah,
do you want to talk to that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so there was actually one of the pictures that I showed where it was the cherry picker that was up removing mistletoe from those plants. That was actually part of Dave Watson's experiment going back kind of 20 years ago. And so they actually had control sites where they had mistletoe healthy populations, and they compared it to areas where they completely removed the mistletoe resource out. And they actually found, when they did bird surveys sometime later, that 30% of the bird diversity dropped away where they'd taken the mistletoe away. And they realised that it was actually because they were taking away all of that heavy leaf litter that the mistletoe drops. It's like sort of a dripping tap of leaves going down below those trees where it occurs. And that's bringing in a whole heap of arthropods, beetles, spiders, all of the really good little critters that our woodland birds like our speckled warblers and grey-crowned babblers love to eat. So the highest drop-off in the species diversity by taking mistletoe away was actually insectivorous woodland birds. So it is actually generally true that you've got a lot more leaf litter below those trees, and it then stimulates, by putting nutrients back into the soil, the growth of other sort of grasses and shrubs and things like that below the tree.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
It's almost 7:30, so we may we'll try and answer any questions we didn't get to. I've suddenly seen a whole bunch that I had previously missed. I'm not sure if they all came in or I've just scrolled in the wrong direction. But there's also a lot of praise in here for the work that you're doing and the fantastic talks you've given tonight. And also give a shout out to Philip, who was the first, mentions in the talk that he was the first person to write up any observation of Regent Honeyeater mimicry. And I'm also grateful to Philip to put the time he first saw a Regent Honeyeater, because it's even a longer time ago than the first time I saw my first Regent Honeyeater. So that, thank you, Philip. You're making me feel not quite so old. Because when Mick said your first sighting was 1998, I was going 1983. But yeah, so thank you everybody for coming along. It's been a fascinating 90 minutes, and I hope you've got as much out of it as I have. I could listen to these two go on forever about basically my favourite bird. I will be voting in Bird of the Year for Regent Honeyeater, make no mistake. And it's so good to see so many people have stayed for the full 90 minutes. Anything I need to mention before we sign off, Mick, Kristy, anything else?
Mm-hmm.
I think we've got the link.
Thanks
to
to Holly and Zoe behind the scenes too. Thanks, guys.
Yes, you talk about Mistletoe fairies. They're the webinar fairies who make this happen. Yeah, thank you very much to both of them, and thank you everybody for coming. If you go through the Q&A section, I think we have the links to the portal, and I think also the propagation guide if you want to get an insight into what you can do locally to help spread the word, spread the actual mistletoe around. So once again, thank you so much everybody for joining us, and thank you Kristy, and thank you Mick. It's been a fantastic evening.
Yeah, thank you for all attending.
Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
See you.